a dog found her first. A 12-year-old girl following a barking dog through the sand dunes of Cape Cod on a July morning in 1974. What she found would haunt her for the rest of her life, and what it would take investigators to answer the most basic question, who is this woman, would take nearly 50 years. Her hands had been removed, her head was nearly severed, and her killer had done everything possible to make sure nobody would ever know her name. It almost worked. But the answer wasn't in a mob rumor. It wasn't in a movie frame. It was much closer than anyone looked for decades. It was in the man she had married just 5 months before she died. July 26, 1974, the height of summer on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Race Point Beach in Provincetown is one of the most remote stretches of coastline on the Cape, a vast expanse of dunes and scrub pine at the very tip of the peninsula, part of the Cape Cod National Seashore. In summer, it draws tourists, sun-seekers, day-trippers, but venture far enough into the dunes and you can walk for miles without seeing another soul. 12-year-old Leslie Metcalf was walking with her family and their friends when their dog bolted into a stand of pine trees and began barking frantically. Leslie followed. She found a woman lying face down on a beach blanket, nude, auburn hair held back by a glittery hairband, pink-painted nails. She might have been sunbathing, except her hands were missing, and her head was nearly severed from her body. Leslie ran. Her father went to confirm what she had seen. Park rangers were called, then the police. Investigators arriving at the scene noted something immediately strange. The body had been placed with unusual care. The woman lay on half of the beach blanket, as if she had been sharing it with a companion. Her blue jeans were folded neatly beneath her head like a pillow. Small piles of pine needles had been arranged in the sand where her hands should have been. Someone had posed her. Someone had taken time, after an act of extraordinary violence, to arrange this woman as if she was simply resting. The cause of death was a catastrophic blow to the left side of the skull. No weapon was found. Investigators estimated she had been dead for up to 2 weeks before Leslie's dog found her. She had been lying there in the summer heat for up to 14 days, and nobody had reported her missing. The investigation that followed became one of Massachusetts' most frustrating cold cases. The victim was a white woman, between 25 and 40 years old, around 5'6", approximately 145 pounds. Athletic build, extensive dental work, expensive dental work, the kind that suggested someone who had cared about their appearance. Her hands had been removed by the killer, almost certainly to prevent fingerprint identification. Several of her teeth were also missing, likely for the same reason. Whoever killed this woman understood forensic investigation well enough to anticipate it. Police searched thousands of missing persons reports. They canvassed the area. They released facial reconstructions, first a clay model, then later updated drawings. They exhumed her body in 1980 and again in 2000 to collect DNA as technology improved. Nothing. Nobody claimed her. Nobody recognized her. No missing persons report matched her description. In October 1974, 3 months after she was found, the woman was buried in a corner of St. Peter's Cemetery in Provincetown. Her headstone read simply, "Unidentified female." She became known as the Lady of the Dunes. The case went cold, then came back, then went cold again. Chief after chief of the Provincetown Police Department inherited the file and inherited the frustration. By 2012, 4 different police chiefs had worked the case. None of them could answer the most basic question: who was she? Then came the theories. none of which pointed anywhere near the truth. In a case with almost no solid evidence, theories filled the vacuum. The most dramatic and the most persistent involved one of America's most notorious criminals, James Whitey Bulger, the Boston mob boss who ran the Winter Hill Gang and spent 16 years as one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. Bulger was known to frequent Provincetown in the 1970s, conducting drug and arms deals out of a local bar. In some mob-related killings of that era, victims' teeth were removed to hinder identification, a detail that resonated with this case. A woman who bore a resemblance to one of the facial reconstructions had been seen in Bulger's company in the area around 1974. Investigators looked hard at the connection. Bulger was never charged. In 2018, he was murdered by fellow inmates in a federal prison, taking whatever he knew with him. Then there was what became known as the Jaws connection. In 2015, true crime writer Casey Sherman noticed something while watching the 1975 Steven Spielberg film. In a crowd scene, a brief shot of beachgoers, he believed he could see a woman matching the Lady of the Dunes description, wearing a distinctive blue headband. Jaws was filmed in Massachusetts between May and October 1974, overlapping with the window when the Lady of the Dunes was alive. If she appeared as a background extra in the film, it would mean she was alive and visible on screen just weeks before her death, and potentially seen by millions of viewers for 50 years without anyone knowing. The theory was investigated. It was never confirmed. It remains one of the most haunting what-ifs in the case. A third name surfaced in 2004. Serial killer Haddon Clark, convicted of 2 murders, sent a letter to a friend claiming he had killed a woman on Cape Cod. He included 2 drawings, one of a handless, naked woman and a crude map pointing to Race Point Dunes. Clark had a history of false confessions. Investigators could not confirm his involvement. 3 theories, 3 dead ends. And all the while, the real answer had been sitting quietly in the records of a Reno, Nevada marriage from February 1974. In 2019, the Cape and Islands District Attorney opened a new investigation using investigative genetic genealogy, the same technique that had identified the Golden State Killer and the same approach used to name the Somerton Man. In October 2022, 48 years after a 12-year-old girl followed a dog into the dunes, the FBI's Boston field office made an announcement. The Lady of the Dunes had a name, Ruth Marie Terry. Born September 8, 1936, in Whitwell, Tennessee, she was 37 years old when she died. Her life had not been easy. She had grown up in rural Tennessee, left home young, briefly married, and given up her infant son for adoption in 1958 when she couldn't afford to care for him. She worked at an automotive plant in Michigan. She drifted. She moved to California. She lost touch with her family so completely that by the time investigators began looking for her, her siblings had listed her as deceased in family obituaries. In reality, she had married a man named Guy Rockwell Moldavin in February 1974 in Reno, Nevada. 5 months later, she was dead in the dunes of Cape Cod. Moldavin was not an ordinary man. He was suspected in the disappearance of a previous wife and his stepdaughter in Seattle in 1960. Police had found human remains in his septic tank, but there was not enough evidence at the time to prove murder. He was suspected in connection with other deaths in California. He had spent his life leaving questions and absences in his wake. Investigators built their case. In August 2023, prosecutors reached their conclusion. Guy Rockwell Moldavin was responsible for the murder of Ruth Marie Terry in 1974. By then, Moldavin was already dead. Authorities consider the case closed. And yet, Ruth Marie Terry's son, given up for adoption in 1958, who grew up never knowing his mother, learned her fate only when investigators reached out to him as part of the genealogy search. He was the DNA match that unlocked everything. He had spent his life unknowingly carrying the key to his mother's identity. The girl who found her, Leslie Metcalf, died in 1996, never knowing who the woman in the dunes was. Moldavin was suspected in multiple other deaths, but he died in 2002, never having to answer for Ruth's murder in a courtroom. The questions that remain aren't about identity anymore. They're about the shape of a life. Why was Ruth Marie Terry in Provincetown? What had those 5 months of marriage been like? Did she know what Moldavin was? Did she try to leave? We know who she was now. We know who killed her. We will never know what those last days looked like. Ruth Marie Terry. Born in Whitwell, Tennessee in 1936, a woman who gave up a son she couldn't afford to keep, drifted across America and married the wrong man at the worst possible time. For 48 years, she lay in a corner of a Provincetown cemetery with no name on her headstone. For 48 years, a family didn't know what had happened to her. For 48 years, a killer's secret held. In 2022, a strand of DNA unraveled it all. She has a name on her headstone now. Her nephew remembers her auburn hair and her big smile. Her son, who never knew her, knows at least who she was. The Lady of the Dunes is no more. There is only Ruth, and the man who took everything from her never spent a single day in a cell. That's the Lady of the Dunes. 48 years of silence, a name finally recovered, and a killer who died free. Subscribe to Terrifying Cases. New files opened every week. Some names are buried for decades, but not always forever.